Welcome to the Authentic Change Podcast. I'm Mike Horne, your host, and this podcast is for leaders and coaches who need and want fresh perspectives on what it means to live and to lead authentically. You're a leader who wants to make a difference, but sometimes you feel stuck. You know there's more to life and to leadership than what you're currently experiencing. It can be tough to figure out how to grow as a leader. You might be reading all the blogs and books, but it still feels like you're not making progress. You might even be feeling like you're doing everything wrong. On Authentic Change with Mike Horne, we interview experts who share their insights on how to live and lead authentically. Our guests are trendsetters in building great leaders, teams, and organizations. We provide fresh perspectives on what it means to live with purpose and authenticity. Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Change Podcast.
Welcome to this episode of Authentic Change with Mike Horne. I am absolutely delighted to have in the virtual studio today, Jeremy Littlejohn. Jeremy is CEO and co-founder at Loopingback.ai. And not only do I want to talk about what he's doing at Loopingback.ai with some great asynchronous video tools that can be deployed across lots of different media, but to talk about what led him to Loopingback.ai, what was the path that took him there, because he's an experienced leader with a history of working in IT and the services industry. Really has some pretty strong skill sets in strategy, data center, SaaS, pre-sales, advanced analytics, and business intelligence. So for all of our folks working in tech companies, this may be of particular interest to you this week. For all of our HR leaders in tech, for all of our part of our Authentic Change with Mike Horne podcast family, and to any new listeners. This will be great for those of you interested in tech. So without much more than that, I want to welcome you, Jeremy, and invite you to say a little bit about yourself to our audience, and that would be great. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for having me on. Brief background on me. I live in Utah, in Park City, Utah, with my wife and 3 kids. And as you mentioned, this is my second business that I've started, or been a co-founder of. My previous business, we started in 2007 and exited that business in 2019. It was in the IT space, and learned a lot about people and engaging with different types of people through that process, which I'd love, happy to share with you guys. And then this business kind of sprang out of that business, right? Some things that we had worked on within that business were the genesis of what we're doing now. And today we're focused heavily on really helping both leaders for their employees and also marketers for their customers put their authentic self out there, right? Make sure that they have a method to do that that's easy, and encourage them to share that authenticity in a format, which is video, that allows it to really come through. And then also be able to receive back communication in the same format. So that's what we focus on today, and happy to take you through some of that or any of our learnings from, it's been 16 years now that I've been a founder / CEO of a business trying to scale in tech space. So I've got a lot of scars from that, and happy to share any of that with you guys.
Yes, let's talk about that. That may be, your career will be of interest to our audience, and certainly to me. You were the CEO of Risk Networks for about 13 years. It's a challenging time, February 2007, challenging for the whole industry at that time. I'd like to talk about that. Hardware company or software company?
Yeah, it started as hardware, moved to software.
That's what I would think.
Started as hardware, moved to software. We founded this business in 2020. So I only like to start businesses at the very rock bottom of any kind of social or economic situation, right?
Okay.
I need a complete economic collapse or some sort of pandemic. Otherwise, I'm just not interested in doing it.
What kept you there 13 years besides, if you're, besides rewards or compensation, or what was it that drove you to stay there for 13 years?
We weren't done with what we wanted to do for those 13 years. And we had a fantastic team. We grew at our largest, we were about 55 employees, which is small compared to, an enterprise company. But for a SaaS startup, that's a good size to
55
get 55
is a lot of people.
Yeah. And, we had a great work environment. Everyone, I think, enjoyed working there. And so it was easy to stay. Right. There was nothing that made it difficult. I think one of the reasons I was able to stay, not to get it, this is for probably a different podcast, but we never took outside money in a fundraising piece. And so that enabled us to craft our own destiny a little bit more than if we had relied on outside money and had pressure for liquidity events or exits or something like that. We were able to run the business more naturally and to let it evolve over a longer period of time. And that made for a better environment to work and live in, basically.
So it limited some of the growth of the company, but you were able to control more of the wealth.
Yeah, well, yes, the wealth and the choices. The choices were ours, right? So we could hire for fit rather than needing to hire for credentials, right? So I could bring a rock star in from another place, and a lot of times when you take outside money in the SaaS world, what they wind up doing is saying, well, this person's credentials are great. They were here, they were there, they did this, they did that. So you should hire them. And regardless of whether they culturally fit with your organization and are going to be successful in your org. And so we were able to not have to do that, right? We were able to hire for people who we knew would fit culturally, or we hoped would fit culturally, and then let them develop a skill over a little longer period of time.
Why leave Asheville and go to Utah?
Utah in the summer. If it was in my perfect world, I would spend the summer and the winter in Utah, in Park City. I would ski and bike and do all of that. And then I would spend the fall and the spring in Asheville. That would be perfect. But, when you have kids with school and football and soccer and activities, that you're not quite able to do exactly what you want. But the weather, the climate, everything about it was perfect for those seasons. So
in the midst of this Risk Networks, which eventually was acquired in 2019, June 2019, you start something called Littlejohn's Garage as well, which is your surname, which is so interesting in and of itself.
Yeah, so the Littlejohn's Garage is a little consulting company I have where I help people, companies primarily, use data analytics to drive their business. A lot of people get intimidated by things like AI or machine learning, and they think, well, I'm in manufacturing. How could I use this? Or I sell some sort of widget on Etsy. How am I going to do this? And it's like those people are interested in talking about or hearing about ideas that can help them leverage those types of technologies. They're way more approachable than people think. So I started that. We were doing that at Risk. It was a skill that I had just to be able to kind of be very practical about applying some of this advanced technology in a very tactical manner. And so I did that. The name of the business is actually because my grandfather on my father's side, whom I met but was very young before he passed away, owned a garage in Dallas, Texas called Littlejohn's Garage. It was not a body shop. And he was really the first entrepreneur in our family. And so when I had the opportunity to kind of start something, I wanted to do an homage to him and really recognize that legacy for us and for our family. And so that's where the name came from, which gives me a lot of, I get a lot of questions about it because people assume it's a garage. And I say, no, it's a more of a workshop for ideas, right? That's what we're working on in this garage.
And how does somebody find you to do that kind of work? To take their business into the garage?
So most of the referrals I would get for that kind of business would come from my network, people who know me, people who've worked with me before. I've done some speaking for other CEO groups. A lot of times CEOs are interested in this, right? They might be frustrated. Why aren't we? I see everybody else doing this. Why aren't we doing this? And, just kind of understanding how they might apply it, some ideas, demystifying some of it. It's a really useful engagement for them. So it could be through something like speaking to a group like Vistage or something around those lines. That's usually how I get it. I spend most of my time working on Looping Back. So it's Littlejohn's Garage is there as an opportunity to engage with an individual who might be interested in doing something custom or unique. But, most of my day is spent on Looping Back.
So risk goes away with Flexera. It's never room for two CEOs. Littlejohn's Garage is operating in the background. And during a lot of that period of time. And then after the sale and acquisition by Flexera of Risk, you start Team Rocket.
Yes. And so Team Rocket was a spin out. The company we started was called HR Data Solutions. And it's had several products that it's sold. HR Data Solutions was originally started based on a system we developed at Risk. So we were not very good at hiring early in our business. Our turnover rate was quite high, 50, 60% in a year. And so we knew we had to be better. What we did was we went out and decided we needed to be better at the interview process so that we could select better candidates for our positions. To do that, we thought, well, let's do some quantification. We were data people. Let's quantify what works and what doesn't work. And so we went out and we bought a test called Wonderlic. I don't know if you're familiar with Wonderlic.
I am.
Yeah. So we were like, all right, let's do Wonderlic and let's see how this goes. And so before we started putting it into our hiring process, though, I said, I want to give the Wonderlic to all of our current employees. And I want to understand what it thinks of our current team. So we did that. And when it came back, it basically said that my co-founder was horrible. And that, one of the people that we knew was probably not going to work out in our business was a rock star. And so we were very frustrated. We said, well, we can't use this. I don't know how to use this. If what it tells me doesn't align with what we are experiencing. And this is nothing about the Wonderlic test. It was fine. It just, when it made a qualitative decision, it didn't really coincide with what our reality was. So internally at Risk, we said, well, let's just get rid of it. And then there was a small group, including one of our HR people. We said, well, wait a minute. What if we do something different with that? What if we assume Wonderlic is actually good at quantifying personality metrics? And, the things that it measures, let's assume that it's good at measuring. What if we then take that and tie it to our performance review data as the qualitative judge and see if we can train a machine learning model that could predict, based on the quantitative metrics, what the qualitative result would be? And again, this is something that we do and did. And turns out we were pretty good at it. We could predict with about 75 to 80% accuracy whether someone was going to be an outperform or an underperform. There was always the neutral not to get into the details, but there was the neutral employee, which is difficult to predict, right? They're great. They're doing their job. They come in, they're part of the team. But what we really cared about was, well, are you going to underperform or are you going to outperform? And so we then pushed that test into the front part of our hiring process. So the very first thing we would do is if you wanted to become an employee, or if you wanted to apply for a job, we would ask you to take the Wonderlic test. And we cared nothing about what Wonderlic thought of the qualitative picture from Wonderlic. What we cared about was consistently quantifying the personality and other types of workplace attributes that Wonderlic did. And then we would put that in our model and say, what does this predict you're going to be? So we began to do that. Some of our team was very uncomfortable with this, to be honest with you, right? To be authentic about it, they were uncomfortable. They were like, I don't want this thing picking. And so we all agreed, well, we won't make it. It certainly won't be the only decision point, right? But let's have it be one of our decision points and an informative decision point. We hired purposefully against the model multiple times. And turns out that the model was correct, right? They wound up being, and because most of the time when people didn't work out in our business, it wasn't because they couldn't do the job. They could always do the job. If we hired a developer, they could always write pretty good code. If we hired someone in marketing, they could always functionally do the marketing role. Or if we hired them in accounting, they could keep books. The question was, how did they work in the team? How did they get along with everyone else? We use the example of, hey, if I'm walking across the room and I see a candy wrapper on the floor, am I picking it up and throwing it away just because it's there and I should do it? Or do I just walk past it? Because it's not really my thing. And so that was kind of what we were looking for, was in each of those disciplines, would they pick up the candy wrapper, so to speak? And so that model and that process was good, and it helped us. When Flexera acquired us, obviously Flexera is a much bigger, and Jim Ryan, who's the CEO there, and their team are great. They're a fantastic company, and a great place to work for. And so, but they have their own processes, and that's what they wanted to do. What we thought was, hey, this thing that we have here, though, is pretty interesting, right? It's pretty cool. And so HR Data Solutions was born out of that. In the beginning of the pandemic, some of our team who had gone to Flexera, unfortunately, because of the pandemic and some rifts there, were let go. And so they thought, hey, they had worked with me on that model, and they thought, can we do this? And so I said, yeah, let's do it. So we stood that business up. That's HR Data Solutions. As we, over the years, developed that and tried to take that to market, we found out a couple of things. There were other people doing it. And frankly, they were as good or maybe better than us in doing that. And that HR was not quite ready for it, right? To be candid with you. That, again, that concept of AI or machine learning doing a prediction about someone's future is uncomfortable. And we get that. And so you had to be really confident in your own decision-making to say, I'll let that be part of this decision, but not all of it. And so that particular piece had some difficulty getting to market, frankly. Within that, sorry for the long-winded answer here, but within that, we did two things. So Team Rocket spun out of that, and it was sales team specific. The reason we did that was because when we went, the key part of HR Data Solutions, and this is something for the HR audience at all sorts of companies, because we were trying to sell that product to huge enterprises with 100,000 employees. We were selling to 20,000 employees, 10,000 employees, 500 employees, 50 employees. But consistently, the biggest issue with that model was I would ask them, do you do performance reviews? And everyone would say, yes, we do performance reviews. And I would say, when was your last one? And I would get a lot of silence, or maybe it was a year ago or 2 years ago. We need to do that. It's coming up. And I would say, okay, where is it? where is the performance review? It's like, well, it's on a printed out sheet in a file cabinet. And I'm like, okay, performance reviews had become these things that were either solely so that I could remove an employee, right? I need to do a performance review so that I can give you a bad review so that I can lay a paper trail to move you out of the business. Or they were always tied to compensation, right? It was like your performance review is really my decision about whether you're getting a raise or not, or a bonus. It wasn't really what performance reviews were designed to do, which was to say, let's have a talk about what the goals are and how we can improve or how I can help you. So companies never had that stuff together. And that was a key missing part of the model that we were building for HR data solutions. We could easily do personality inventories and these types of things. But if I can't tie them to a performance review as the qualitative piece, then it's not useful. Where that's not the case is on a sales team. Sales teams have that data. They know who hit their number, who didn't hit their number. And so Team Rocket came out of that knowing that we could sell specifically to a sales team and that sales team would have the data necessary to train a model. So we sold that product a little bit into those sales teams. I think the challenge on the sales team side was, for us, the reason Team Rocket is no longer a product we sell was because there just wasn't enough volume in any particular company. I might have 50 salespeople, but I'm not turning over enough or hiring enough new salespeople just on that team to justify this investment. And so Team Rocket was designed for that. And eventually we just kind of wound that product down. But all of what I just described was the genesis for Looping Back. Because what we wanted to be able to do was enable people to do those performance reviews better and have an AI component of the performance review that could help build the qualitative model we needed. So what we did was we said, hey, why don't you do a performance review? So if your audience is listening right now and they ask themselves, how many performance reviews have they done? If they're an HR leader, they have HR people reporting to them. Do they do it once a year, once a quarter, once a month, once every 2 years? And what does it look like? And does anybody like it? And I think for the reasons that we talked about, being tied to compensation, being tied, everybody feels like, well, you're just kind of laying the groundwork for letting me go if you need to or something. People hate performance reviews. And what they will avoid them at any cost. When you see it come on your schedule, you're just like, oh my God. The employee is extremely anxious during it. The leader is. The chances that the leader is actually probably running a good performance review are very low. Communicating appropriately where expectations are and being clear about that. And the fact that we have to do it synchronously in the same room together is super stressful. So long story short, we said, hey, why don't you do these asynchronously? What if I say to you on a video recording, here's my expectations, Mike. Here's my feedback to you about how things are going. And what I would like you to do is take a moment and just process that and then come back to me with comments, questions, concerns, whatever it is that you feel like you want to communicate to me. And we could do this asynchronously. The nice thing about that was it created a library of that feedback out that we could help the manager score. How are you talking? Are you using growth mindset? Are you being authentic? Are you talking about the company's core values? Or are you skipping that? And then we would have an understanding of what the employees fed back in as well. And that was the genesis of Looping Back, was a structure to enable this type of performance review to happen more frequently and in a much less stressful environment. We built the model to do that. It includes survey engines within it, so I can have a video and a survey and a video and a survey or whatever I want to do. And we released it for that purpose. What we found was people wanted to use it for a lot more stuff, right? They wanted to use it just to do CEO communications. How do I fill the gaps between my all hands meetings? I wanted to talk to customers with it. I want to do sales calls with it, right? So it has now morphed into doing a lot more than that, but that was the genesis of the product.
I see. So somebody in the C-suite or in corporate communications or in HR might be likely buyers of this. It's interesting. I resonate with a lot of the experiences you share. I think for the most part, and I've said this a lot, I mean, performance reviews are a gigantic waste of time. I mean, having led an HR organization or HR organizations in different places, all of what you say is true. Managers are underprepared or ill-prepared to deliver performance feedback. It is in many ways a compensation mechanism where that's what we use it for. It is a way of creating a curve and distributing equity rewards, compensation rewards, cash comp rewards, and other entitlements. But for the most part, it's a waste of time. And you know, I've gone the gamut on this. I've for my C-suite executives I've supported, I've written their performance reviews. So I appreciate what you say in that regard. I also have a lot of experience in data analytics. Some people, I've read this, credit me with creating the first people analytics function in the pharmaceutical industry. And, I went out, I hired a bunch of IO psychologists. I mean, working in the pharmaceutical industry, in this particular biopharma I was working in at the time was, there was a lot of money around. They had a lot of success. So it enabled that kind of work. And our dream was always about creating more predictive analytics around people. And it's only so far that I think it can go. The ability to do primary research in organizations. I think we did some stuff relative to women scientists returning back to work, and I think we did some good work in that regard. But the other kinds of predictive analytics all sound so sexy and attractive about who's going to fail and and most people aren't buying because they're probably afraid they're going to fail. Who knows? I don't know. I never understood what the rationale there. I do find that it has worked in sales efforts, though, in sales organizations I've supported. I think you're right, because there are more quantitative metrics. I have participated in large scale, let's hire the right salespeople. So where the company is interviewing the top sales performers and the worst sales performers, creating a behavioral metric around best performers, and then hiring on that basis.
Yeah, it's a necessity, right? To have consistent. As a data scientist, you're looking at it and saying, I don't really care what, like this is what our thing was with Wonderlic. I don't care if Wonderlic is good at saying you're a doer versus a talker, let's say, or whatever it was. I really don't care as long as it's consistent. If it's consistently and someone who answers in a certain way is consistently flagged as this or consistently flagged as that, it's the consistency that enables you to build models. And I think for us, that was one of the biggest challenges in HR, was that we didn't have a lot of consistency in the data. Right, that it would change. Hey, we have a new HR leader. They care. They're going to implement a different system. We do this. But again, like on the sales teams, that was usually right. You were able to get a little more consistent metric, and it's hard. I know one of the leaders who was a engineering leader at PayPal, and now is at Google as an engineering leader. and a leader of one of their big units. And, I asked him, how do you quantify engineering productivity, right? What makes a good software engineer? And he said that was what he spent many, many months and years debating with his other leadership so that they could build their own models to try and just track whether someone's doing well or not. So it's hard, right? And that has to be a primary goal of the management team in order to get that consistency. And a lot of times it's not. Right?
That's great. I really appreciate it, Jeremy Littlejohn, and everyone can find out more about Jeremy and his current endeavors at Loopingback.ai. And I'm wondering, we've talked a lot of tech here today. I mean, a lot of shop in that regard. And haven't really gotten to enough of the leadership story that I'm interested in, but we'll save that for another time. Jeremy, if you were going to leave our audience with just a couple of comments on what it takes to be successful as an entrepreneur, what would those one or two pieces of guidance be?
Oh, as an entrepreneur, staying in the game is the only way to have a chance to win the game. And so finding a way to stay in the game, your business in the game long enough to catch a wave, right? It's like you're a surfer. You can have the best surfboard and be the best surfer, but you still have to depend on a wave to come. And so sometimes you time that wrong when you first go out. So you just have to be able to wait and tread water and wait for that wave to come. And I think that's a big part of being successful as an entrepreneur.
One of our guests and a friend of the show, Alden Mills, who invented the perfect push-up and has accomplished some other great things, former Navy SEAL and other accomplishments. He calls it persistency.
Yeah.
The ability to persist.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Get by. Sometimes you just have to get by. Not everything's a big, not everything is like a big celebration of success. Sometimes you just get by.
And it differs from consistency. It's not just being persistent. Yeah. What's your other point, Jeremy?
Well, I was just going to say, one of the things I would talk to, since I have the opportunity to talk to HR through this, and it's authenticity is a big part of your podcast. One of the things that we found is when I talk to leaders today, so leaders use our platform to talk to their employees, again, fill this space in between all hands meetings, and then be able to get feedback because it's a two-way video, right? So they can get feedback from employees. And a lot of times what we get is, well, are people really going to go on video? And this is something that applies across the board, whether it's being authentic, whether it's demonstrating core values for your business, whether it's being on video, doesn't matter. If the leader doesn't do it, the employees are never going to do it. I find so many times that HR leaders and in support of their C-suite says, well, I don't think our employees will do this, and I don't think they'll do that. And I say, well, are the leaders doing it? Is the CEO willing to send out a video talking about how his week went or her week went, or how the month is going? Are they willing to send out communication when things aren't going great and be authentic and direct with employees about it? Because if they're not willing to do it, your employees are never going to do it. And you can never expect them to do it. And so starting any of that, whether it's a new type of communication, whether it's a new type of interaction, whether it's, radical candor, if the C-suite, if it doesn't start in the C-suite and they don't demonstrate that they're going to do it, there could be no expectation that an employee would ever do it. And you can't fault them for not doing it. So for the HR leaders who are then interacting with the C-suite, reinforcing to the C-suite that you have to lead from the front and actually do whatever it is that you're wanting the employees to do, is critical, right? And so they probably already know that, but to hear it about a functional, like tactical thing, we're going to implement Salesforce, is the CEO updating Salesforce? Because if they're not, then why would any employee update it or whatever? Any of these types of things I think are just super important to reinforce with the C-suite. And as we used to say at Risk, don't say 1,000 things, say one thing 1,000 times. So just keep telling them that. And then hopefully, if they start to do it, it becomes much easier to get compliance downstream.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jeremy Littlejohn, the CEO and co-founder of Loopingback.ai. You'll find all of the links to Jeremy and how to get in touch with him in the show notes. So, Jeremy, once again, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it.
And until the next episode of Authentic Change with Mike Horne, stay well.
Thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast. I'm delighted that you've tuned in to listen. Please visit the show notes for links to topics discussed in today's podcast. To download a free ebook on authentic change and leadership and to subscribe to my newsletter, please visit mike-horne.com. Once again, mike-horne.com, mike-horne.com. Once again, thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast.